May all beings be happy. May all beings be healthy. May all beings be free from harm. May all beings love life. May all beings awaken. Welcome to another Cuke Audio podcast. I'm DC Poobah of Cuke Audio and Cuke Archives, preserving the legacy of Shunryu Suzuki and those whose paths cross his. And anything else that comes to mind. I pray that you and yours are safe and comfortable, free from economic hardship, and able to get out and do whatever it is you want within the limitations of the universal precept of do as little harm as possible. So today we've got a guest, Ken Knabb, K-N-K-N-A-B-B. I met Ken years ago at Zen Center, but I've been familiar with him through the years as a situationist, and I'd see him at the Anarchist Book Festival. In fact, I got a picture of him on Cuke.com at his table with all his books and pamphlets and stuff at an Anarchist Book Festival, I think, like somewhere Civic Center or somewhere where they have those sorts of things in San Francisco. His website is Bureau of Public Secrets. Well, that's sort of the name of it. The actual, what you write is BOP, B-O-P, secrets.org. Massive website. He's known for his writing about and preserving the memory and legacy of the poet Kenneth Rexroth, and for his writing about and translating and bringing to light the French Situationists, which he preferred over the anarchists. Anyway, he's going to tell you all about all this, and quite interesting. And he's done his share of sessions, too. He has a long involvement with the Berkeley Zen Center, and he talks about sessions in the mountains. You know, like, all right, I think his first one like that was, that's the memory I have, but taking him out to Point Reyes National Seashore, taking a group there and doing a session. Anyway, very interesting. And, you know, his life in and out of Buddhism and political awareness, very interesting. All right, so that's enough. He's going to say it much better than I can. So listen, after we've had our pause to meditate, we'll give Ken Knabb a call, and let's see what he has to say. In this, the last podcast of for now, I plan to do one a week now, while I'm on my so-called writing retreat or finishing a book retreat, and I'll put something up anytime I feel like it. So mainly, though, I want to concentrate on the book, so I got to pull back from all these other demanding chores. So when you hear the bell, if you're of such a mind, hit pause and meditate or whatever for as long as you want. And when you're ready to come back, hit unpause. And we'll be here to hit the bell to end the meditation or whatever and begin our journey with Ken Knabb. Hi.
Hi, David. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Good.
So right here at first, Ken and I talk about how to record this. It's Zoom. See, and I've never done a podcast in Zoom, but he wanted us to look at each other. And I've never done that. We could have done it with Messenger too. But I've just been into audio, and I can remember and imagine what people look like. See them as celestial beings. Anyway, so we were talking about how to record it and talking about Zoom. And then he went into this.
I have been hosting my book group in Zoom for 2 or 3 years now. So I kind of have the basics, but for most of it, I haven't been recording them because I just wanted to make sure, that we had, so if you're also recording it, and I think that I click the thing that says it'll be recorded onto my computer rather than the cloud, which hopefully means that it'll just show up and I won't have to search for it. And hopefully the same thing will happen with you.
Yeah. Well, do you have a Mac or a PC?
I have a PC.
Well, there's a program called Search Everything. That Void Tools. And it is so helpful when you want to find something. Any file name or folder name in your computer, it will find. Or in externals if they're connected. Anyway, all right. Well, that's good. Hey, Ken, good to see you.
Okay, good to see you. Why don't you do whatever your little introductory thing is?
I don't. I do that later.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it is neat seeing you, I must say. So what are you up to these days?
Well, I've been, I'm in a pretty plush situation here. Even during COVID, actually, I'll go through my life briefly, but I guess we can go backwards. Like, I've been in Berkeley since 1965.
Yeah.
And I had an extremely cheap rented cottage during most of that time. It was a little cottage, rather ramshackle, in the back of another house, but it was $35 a month in 1966, and the landlords didn't raise the rent very regularly. Like they did raise it. Okay, now it's 45 years later, and then 50, and so on. But in the year 2000, so I've still been at that point. I've been here. There 35 years, the rent was $125 a month.
Wow.
And this is a cottage. Now, admittedly, a ramshackle cottage, but, so that was one way that I kind of got by without having to have a heavy duty wartime career.
Right.
Anyway, so I was able to do a lot of other things. And then eventually, the landlords died, and their kids wanted to sell the properties, and so some new guy bought it, and he wanted to get rid of me because it's like a rent-controlled thing in Berkeley, obviously, and so I won't go into detail, but he kind of tried to pressure me out, but I got a lawyer and all this thing. And so we finally arranged for him to pay me a lot of money to leave.
Very good.
And so that was after 48 years in that place.
Wow.
So then.
Where was it?
I thought, okay, so I got, like a cushion to.
Yeah.
But then I thought, well, Berkeley is pretty expensive and hard to find places at this point. And I found a great place within a couple weeks in Berkeley. I thought I might have to, go to the neighboring places to find something cheaper. So it's a more normal rent. I'm paying like $11.50 a month now instead of $300 or something.
Oh,
But anyway, I have a nice landlady who lives upstairs and is a landscape architect. So we have a nice patio garden here that I can have parties in if I want to. So anyway, that was great. Like I'm still in Berkeley, and I had that cushion, from the previous landlord, that helped me, ease into paying higher rent.
yeah.
And then, so anyway, I'm financially in reasonable shape, and that helped out some.
Yeah.
And I'm living in Berkeley, the place I want to be, and uh, it's in a pleasant neighborhood in the Berkeley Hills.
Mm.
It's just a fine situation. So then COVID came along, uh, which is a drag, obviously. But by that time, I was almost retired, and the work I was doing was editing work from my home anyway. So, uh, I have a book group, actually more than one. And so that's where I've been putting a lot of my energy and fun seeking there, is just, and doing that on Zoom, which I've been doing for the last couple of years, means that, people all over the country can join us. It's not
Yeah.
just people in Berkeley like it was before. So anyway, that's all very pleasant. And uh, so anyway, my understanding, I've listened to one of your podcasts, and it was the whole thing with Liz Horowitz,
Yes.
because I know her, and actually, coincidentally, um, I was looking at Mel Weitzman's autobiography, his memoirs, that will be published next year.
Yeah.
So that kind of made me even more interested, because I'd been communicating with Liz about, some details about his life and so on. So anyway, from listening to your thing with Liz there, I gather that it's just pretty freewheeling. You're just having a conversation, and
That's right.
and then you said in your emails that it is kind of open-ended, but your overall view is that you're doing Suzuki Roshi related things, like how did people intersect with him. So we can talk about that, and then in the process, I'll talk about a few other things in my life that sort of overlapped.
Well, it's broader than that.
Okay.
I do podcasts with a number of people who never met him. I do podcasts with people who've had no relationship to speak of with this lineage. But let's say in your case, you did have some experience with Suzuki Roshi, but I'm interested in everything else. To me, it's what's interesting. Well, one thing that's very interesting and essential is that people weren't just meditating and thinking of Zen and, that sort of thing. They had lives. They did other interesting things. I'm interested in the other interesting things, and so is everybody else, or some people. Anyway, So I'm interested in all of it. For one thing, you said you have a couple of book groups. What are they about?
Okay, I'd like to put that off because that's sort of more recent, and maybe go back to the.
Oh, you want to go back to the first? I go backwards a lot.
And then we'll get there.
Yeah.
But,
yeah, sure.
So I was born in 1945 in Louisiana, where my parents had gone. It was just at the end of World War II.
Yeah.
And so it was like an army base, and then my father went into the army.
Yeah.
But my mother had me there because she didn't want to try, she was pretty far into the pregnancy. And then after I was born, my mother went to her home in Minnesota on a farm, and I was there for a couple of years. And then my father came back after the war, and then we all moved to his hometown, Springfield, Missouri, which is a big city of the Ozarks. So I was raised there, and I won't go into details except, you know, it was a fairly pleasant childhood and all that. But a key thing that happened when I was about 13 or 14 was that I became an atheist. And Springfield is like a very Bible Belt kind of area, the Ozarks and so on. And so that was the first time that, up till that point, I had been pretty much part of the society and didn't, you know, I went to church and all these things, you know, and assumed, you know, went along with things. But once I had decided that stuff was bullshit, that was after reading an essay by Bertrand Russell. You know, it was almost instant. Like he had said in his autobiography, he had said something like, and so at this point I became an agnostic or something like that. And I sort of did a double take and I thought, what? Because, you know, being in a place like Springfield, the assumption was that everybody was a Christian, or maybe there were a few Jewish people or something, you know, but that was kind of the thing. And atheism, you know, oh, that must be like those communists in Russia or something.
Yeah.
You know, and so, but once I just had the concept that an intelligent person could say, well, no, I don't believe that stuff. I thought, well, why is it that you know, and I thought about it for about a day, and the next day I said, yeah, I don't believe it. So
that's great.
And I kept that quiet for about a year because I thought I was the only one in town. You know, it wasn't at all like these days. You would be aware, you know, with internet or people try that there were people, you know, who had different beliefs or non-beliefs. But anyway, when I finally came out in high school, it was kind of a shock. And I was like, you know, this really black sheep, you know, like everybody. So, you know, they're saying, here's this kid who his teachers think he's the brightest guy in town and all this, and have been praising him all these years. And now he says he doesn't believe in God, you know. So, so anyway, then, so I wanted to get out of there, and I went to this place called, there was this high school advisor who called me into his office one time when I was like a sophomore. And he said, I got this catalog in the mail from Shimer College, and I thought of you. And it's this little great books discussion group kind of college.
Yeah.
And in Illinois, so not too far away.
Yeah.
And you can go there without having a high school diploma.
Oh.
They have a program, you know, like I was a perfect example, you know, like a bright young kid who's bored in high school or something, you know, not accomplishing anything there. And so there were so I went there, and that was a great breakthrough. So I won't go into that detail, except that was really interesting. It introduced me to the wider world, you know, like people from big cities, Chicago and New York, and
the great books.
And the great book. Well, I was already doing that. I was already reading on my own, but it was kind of abstract, you know, reading about that. But when I met these people, you know, they had a more international thing. You know, they had ethnic cuisines, folk musics, radical politics, which I'd never heard of, all these kinds of things. You know, particularly a lot of people were from the Chicago area, and this was in the early 60s. It was not yet what we think of as the 60s, but it was creeping in there. It was sort of like between the beats and the hips. Hippies did not exist yet, but, you know, the seeds were growing. And at that time, I had heard of Zen, and I had read the book Zen Flesh, Zen Bones,
Yeah.
which had come out, and one of my friends in Missouri had showed it to me and said, "Hey, this is cool. Look at this is weird stuff." And I read it, and that sounded real interesting.
Yeah.
It was very, very different. And but again, it was just something I was reading about. I mean, had no concept of what is this, a practice or something. But anyway, I knew it was there. And then I was reading a little bit of the beats, and I read a beat anthology, from like 1960 or something.
Oh, yeah.
This is 61 when I'm off to college. And in that, in addition to Ginsberg and Kerouac and so on, they had a letter from Japan by Gary Snyder, and so I thought, well, this is a guy who seems very hip, but he's also doesn't seem like he's, a junkie or, I mean, he seems like he's a guy that is down to earth, and he decides he's going to study Zen. And so he learns Japanese and Chinese and then goes to Japan back in the days when it was very hard to do. That there was not much of a welcoming thing. You pretty much had to know Japanese and all that.
Yeah.
And so, and then I had read The Dharma Bums by Kerouac about Snyder. So that gave me, I thought, wow, this is impressive. I don't know that I would be capable of that, but he immediately became one of these figures like, gosh, wow, look what he's doing with his life. So then I go to this college. And when I'm done with the college in 1965, I go out to Berkeley, where one of my friends had coincidentally gone out the year before, and he was in the free speech movement, and he was a young poet, and he at Cal, at the University of Berkeley, he was taking a course of poetry by Gary Snyder, who had come back after many years in Japan. And there was this one year, I guess it was 1964, 65 or something like that, where he was teaching a graduate course at Cal. And so, obviously I said, I want to be in Berkeley, and so as soon as I was graduated, I came out here.
What year?
That was 65.
Mm-hmm. Oh, right. You already said that. Yeah.
And starting that semester, my friend Sam was going to SF State for graduate courses in poetry and so on. And he said, well, one of my courses is going to be with Kenneth Rexroth. And I thought, oh, great, because I had also just discovered him. Maybe the previous year, I'd read a few essays by him, and I thought, oh, this guy is really, sort of vaguely similar to Snyder, except he's a generation older, maybe different personality. But in both cases, they were very bright, unconventional people, And so I went with my friend to Rexroth said, oh, yeah, you can. You don't have to, you can audit this, so to speak. And this class was basically just conversation. I mean, it had no, format or anything like. There were no grades or anything. And basically, a lot of it was just asking Rexroth questions. But he'd also ask us questions, because the counterculture was sort of starting up, and he'd say, oh, well, what are you guys doing? Oh, you're going to these rock concerts. Tell me about that, and blah, blah, blah. Well, Mr. Rexroth, what do you think about Bob Dylan? And he said, well, he kind of reminds me of this French singer, blah, blah. He was sort of opening up wider horizons.
Mm.
And we'd say, well, what do you think about psychedelic art? This is when the first rock band posters were coming out and stuff like that. And he said, well, of course, the great problem with psychedelic art is that it's so boring. And we were saying, what? We thought it was real exciting, But he's saying, well, it's kind of repetitious and blah. You said, the greatest psychedelic artist was blah, 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 and he mentioned some medieval woman who we've never heard of that was like a Catholic saint who painted her visions. So once again, I'm just throwing out a few of these things where he's just opening perspectives to us who were very ripe for it. I mean, you say, oh, tell me about that, or tell me about this French guy, or blah, blah, blah. So that was a big, influence on me. And that was an influence that was subtle and it grew. So that kind of came up over the next few years. But meanwhile, right around that time, I think maybe early 66 or something, I became aware that there was a Zen Center in San Francisco. And I went over there and, to their weekly lectures and stuff like that, or other miscellaneous talks. And so I saw Suzuki Roshi. I was never intimately involved, but I had one day sitting with him. I went over there, in the early morning. And so I should mention, before I went to Cal, I was in sort of in the middle of my Shimer College thing. I spent a summer in Chicago. And when I was in Chicago, I was in this bookstore one time, this major store, Crocs and Brentanos, and I was looking in the Buddhism section or whatever, and there was an older guy there, and we started a conversation. He said, well, there's a Zen Center right here in Chicago. I said, no, I didn't know that. So he turned me on to this, and there was a regular Zen Center there, small, but with a Japanese, Roshi.
Matsunaga, I think is his name.
Something like Makioka or Soyu. I forget his name, but anyway, so I went there. So that was actually my first encounter with formal Zen, as opposed to just reading, Alan Watts and D.T. Suzuki and sort of, in a kind of abstract way. That's where I learned how to do Zazen, and, they had incense and a few. It was somewhat similar to the San Francisco thing. It was a Soto Zen practice. Only in that case, it wasn't very big. There were just, a dozen or two people would show up, once a week or something. And so, but I got a little taste there. So then when I went to San Francisco, I knew how to do Zazen. So, so I did that one day sitting with Suzuki Roshi and various other, like I say, lectures. Like one time Paul Reps was there to give a lecture, for example.
That's wonderful.
They'd have, interesting things. And so I was going over there, like I say, maybe, every week or two for I guess, whatever the Saturday or Sunday program was.
Saturday.
One time I was over there and I said, well, I'm in Berkeley. And they said, oh, there's this guy is starting a Zen Center in Berkeley. I said, oh, give me, because it was a real pain in the ass, to get across the bridge or something. It was kind of out of the question, to go over there very often, let alone real early in the morning. So I found out that was Mel Weitzman, of course, and it was February 1967 that he had found that house, and Suzuki Roshi had asked him to find a place where they could have a regular center instead of just moving around, and he had opened that in February 67, and I was there a week later. So, and at that time, typically they had only morning sittings. They didn't have afternoon ones. And they didn't have sessions or anything like that. They'd go to San Francisco for any bigger thing. But anyway, I started going there, and another friend of mine came along too during some of that. for some of those early morning things. And often there were just 3 or 4 people there. There weren't very many. The most I ever saw was maybe 7 or 8 people. And but it was, the basic practice was just like what we do, just like what you were doing. You would go there and sit zazen facing the wall. The difference was that Mel was not considered a teacher. He was our host, but Suzuki Roshi or Katagiri Roshi sensei would come over once a week. And when they were there, like Katagiri would do a sort of one-man band thing with being the kokyo and the mokugyo and the bell all at once, because nobody else knew how to do it. Even Mel had not learned that. I think he probably did a bit later. But at that time, it was just a place for East Bay people to, meet. And then there might be a little question and answer or something. But we would go over to San Francisco on Saturdays for actual lectures or any other events. So I was quite interested in that, but other things were going on. Well, one thing that happened was that I was not going to school anymore, and so I got a job as a mailman for 6 months. And that completely shot the schedule because, of course, I was getting up early and going to my job for that. So I got out of the habit. For 6 months, I wasn't going there at all because there was a constant conflict. And by the time I stopped, having accumulated enough money to live for a couple of years in my cheap fashion, I had kind of got out of the rhythm of things, and the counterculture was in full bloom by that, like Haight-Ashbury and all that stuff. So other people were coming out from the Midwest, from Shimer, from Missouri, or many of them were staying at my cottage, sort of as a halfway house. So a lot of stuff was going on. And this is where the first rock bands were happening, the first light shows, the Human Being, the Trips Festival kind of things. And just, you were around there, at that point, I was just sort of caught up in all these things. And I thought one of these things is Zen practice, which I respected, and it was always in the background, but I wasn't, except for those first few weeks when I had been kind of regular, I wasn't really doing it as a regular thing. I would tell people about it, and I would maybe pop by over there occasionally. So that continued to be, I was sort of not in it, but sort of aware of it as a background thing for the next couple decades, actually. Occasionally, I would go to BZC, and as I would go there a few years later, they fixed a Zendo up, instead of just having a little thing in the living room, and they had that Zendo in the attic, and so on. And I'd kind of get into it, but I also had a little bit of qualms about the forms. So I don't want to go into those too much. Like I thought,
yes,
some of them are kind of nice. I sort of like that, but other of the forms, it seems like, well, they're just imitating this traditional Japanese stuff, which may or may not be of any interest, and so I wasn't, like 100%, I want to do this thing. But when, if I would have difficulties in my life or times sort of transition modes, I was always aware in the back of my mind, well, I could always pick up that zazen and stuff again. But I wasn't doing that very much, like in the 70s and so on. And meanwhile, just to kind of get some other things that were going on in my life that sort of intersected, but in some extent contradicted. While I was there in the Bay Area in the 60s, I was thoroughly in the counterculture, taking LSD and peyote and all these things, and all the kind of communal sorts of things and all that. And also, of course, inevitably, the new leftish kind of things, like the Vietnam War, civil rights, various things like that. And as you remember, this is a time when we were subject to the draft.
Right.
So that kind of made it more real, like this isn't just some abstract thing that we're against this, we may have to. So I managed the draft thing by, in early 1968, I got a draft notice to say report for, the exams, that's.
Yeah.
So, I hadn't really thought about what I would do, but in my autobiography, I have a little description, which I think is pretty funny. I mean, it was a funny situation. I went there and I thought, they're not going to take somebody like me. I mean, they'd be crazy too or something. But when I got through the exam, it looked like, hey, you're on the road to Vietnam, they weren't paying attention to, these things that said I was a, anti-authoritarian or something. And I thought, ooh, I better do something here quick. And so I made up my mind. I was not going to leave there until I would resolve this.
Yeah.
And so the psychologist who had passed me as being okay, I barged into his office and just started screaming at him I didn't have a plan exactly. I was just sort of ad-libbing.
Right.
The most
good,
sort of credible things. I wasn't like being like Donald Duck or something, but I was sort of seriously saying, you stupid son of a bitch, you think but just wait till I get in there and they give me a gun and tell me to do this and I shoot some officer. Then what are you going to think of your, like I had a sort of childish, brattish
meltdown
impression that I was giving.
Yeah.
And yet it was very close to the reality because, of course, if I was in such a situation, who knows what I would do. But I wanted him to think this guy we don't know what he's going to do. So after I did that for a while, he, led me down the hall to some other officer, and I kind of gave the same routine with them. So this superior guy brought me into the thing and he says, now listen, I've seen a lot of people in this business and some of them I disagree with, but I could respect their position. But you, judging from you, we haven't come very far since the caveman.
Good.
And during all this, I was trying not to smile, and I sort of gripped the desk like I was. And he says, "You're not good enough for the Army. Now, that's probably just what you want. But let me tell you." Anyway, he signed some paper that says this guy is not, we're not having him, and gave me the paper and I grabbed it and stomped out and stomped down the room and turned in the paper wherever I was supposed to do and went out the door, got around the corner and started skipping down the street.
Yeah, good for you.
So I had avoided that.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, there's all this new left stuff, which I'm not going to go into, except to say that I was there. Like there were anti-war marches and Black Panther things and all this kind of thing. And then about a year later in 1969, I became an anarchist. I started getting kind of disillusioned with a lot of the more authoritarian aspects of the new left, especially like the Panthers or some of the SDS people.
Mm-hmm.
And I had a friend from Shimer College who was an anarchist, and I thought maybe this is what he's, so I read a bunch of stuff. I went over to his place and got a sack full of pamphlets and stuff and read it and said, yes, this is it. yeah, I'm radical like this, but I'm also anti-authoritarian. You know, so this stuff about worshiping Mao or the Viet Cong or something is also bullshit. And that so that was kind of a transitional thing where I was becoming a little more independent politically. Before then, I'd just sort of been along for the ride, you know, whatever demonstrations. And so in the process of the next few months, of having a little bit of a criticality towards the movement, I heard about May 68 in France, which I had been aware of at the time, but didn't, you know, in America, people didn't know that much about it. I just thought, oh, they're protesting too or something, which was a very understatement.
No kidding, right.
And then I read some books and pamphlets about that, and in them it was frequently mentioned there was this little obscure extremist avant-garde group called the Situationists, more specifically the Situationist International. It was like an organization. And I said, whoa, this sounds interesting. And so a few months later, one of my friends and I discover up on Telegraph Avenue at a bookstore a few pamphlets by the Situationists. So of course we grabbed them, you know, and read them. And I said, whoa, this is kind of like anarchists, but it's more coherent, it's more intelligent, it's more rigorous, and it includes things like Marxism or Surrealism. You know, it sort of also assimilated that. It wasn't just a sort of simple-minded thing against the state or, you know, against authority or something like that. So I can't possibly in this sort of format give a whole thing, you know, explanation of this stuff. But the thing is, once my friend and I had gotten into this, then we were really noticing that there were a few other similar people around. Like there was another little group in Berkeley that put out some leaflets, and so we contacted them, and then there was a group that.
Well, wait. So, the other group, what were they?
It was a group called the Council for the Eruption of the Marvelous. It was a little would-be situationist group in Berkeley.
Cool.
That had discovered the situationists kind of like I had, maybe a little bit earlier, on the East Coast, actually. And so they were already doing some interesting things, which, again, these things are described in my autobiography, you know, like...
What's the name of your autobiography?
It's called Confessions of a Mild-Mannered Enemy of the State.
Ah, very good.
It's in this book called Public Secrets, Collected Skirmishes of Ken Knabb, which I put out in the 90s.
I've got that. Yeah.
Okay. So if you've got that, the autobiography is in there. It's like, you know, 50 or 60 pages or something like that. And it's also on my website. All my writings and translations.
What's your website?
The website is www.bopsecrets.org. And that stands for Bureau of Public Secrets.
Yeah.
Which is my one-man organization. That's you know, when I sign a pamphlet or publish something. I started that in like 1973. So anyway, for the next decades, actually since that time, 1970, really uninterrupted, I have been into that scene and participating in it, knowing hundreds and hundreds of people around the world, particularly in France and the United States, but a lot of other countries too. And it's a very tumultuous scene. There were heartbreaking breakups and debates and all this kind of thing. But basically, we had, I should say, they had, and I substantially agreed, like with not only these political positions, but the kind of tactics that they used, which were very untypical tactics for leftist people.
Such as?
For example, the typical leftist group wants to recruit. Even there may be different kinds of groups, but they're trying to convince people to join them. And situationists actually adopted almost the counter thing. They did feel they were talking about a revolution that would be cultural, political, economic, the whole works, that would involve masses of people, but they were not talking about something that would be led by somebody like Lenin or Mao or something like this, that you would get some politicians and everybody would vote for them or go along with their thing. They felt that that kind of thing had shown its bankruptcy in like the Russian Revolution or the various other things that had come up in the early 20th century. And that what happened is that in that classic form of a political party, a hierarchical party, the people at the top of the party ended up running things. And it could be relatively benign, like social democrat, bureaucrats or something, or it could be like the Bolsheviks, like Stalinism, Mao, and so on, where, they're sending people to concentration camps and, becoming like a 1984-ish sort of situation. So looking back at that, the situationists, similar to anarchists, but like I said, again, with a little more coherent strategy, had the idea that the thing was to awaken people in such a way that they would make their own decisions. And with a sort of implicit faith that in the right circumstances, people, even though they will make mistakes and all that kind of thing, they are the ones who have to be the deciders. I mean, everybody, not a select few. You may have a select few people who are inspiring some of these things or who are arousing these, but they're not running it. And so situationists, for example, I'm oversimplifying here a little bit, but a typical thing would be like if somebody said, "Oh, I agree with you, situationist folks, tell me what to do." And I said, "Fuck you." You don't get it. We're not somebody that you can sign up with, and hand out our leaflets or be our, pawns in some mass movement. You have to, grow up. You have to take control of your life, your decisions. You have to experiment. Try different things, see what works, what doesn't. And so a lot of the kind of agitations that I did and some of my friends were sort of emulating what the situationists had done, would be things that pull the rug out from under somebody without leaving more to pose the right questions rather than to present the correct answers. I mean, I'm oversimplifying. Obviously, we think there are certain correct answers. You don't do this and da da da. But basically, the thing is to arouse people to think for yourself. try things for yourself, experiment for yourself. That's the way you, and the best way I can, it sounds kind of abstract just for me to talk about that, but what happened in May 68 was that the Situationists in the previous decade had been sort of doing their little obscure things, and most people had never heard of them. And many of the people who had heard of them hated them because they thought, oh, these nasty people are always criticizing and da, da, da. But those little things kind of crept around and around. And when May 68 happened, it just suddenly it snowballed, from a little group that was influenced by the Situationists. I mean, just half a dozen people start something, and then there's reactions to that, and then it spreads, and then the publicity for that comes. And in a period of less than a month, it went from a little tiny group in a couple university areas through a little bit of street fighting, through some violent things, through a takeover of buildings. And like I say, within less than a month, France was at a standstill with 11 million people occupying their factories and workplaces. And where did it come from? Like everybody said, what the hell? Yeah, and this was not something by the Communist Party or the Socialists. On the contrary, those people were vehemently opposed to this. They were scared shitless because it was like undermining, those people want to keep control of things, even if they want to set up a new system under their own control or something. The last thing they want is for all this. So I won't go into that, except just to say that there that was. And the same people who had been saying, oh, these Situationists are some weird little eccentric group, they're always quoting Marx or Hegel or something, or criticizing everything, and nobody gives a shit. You can't understand what they're talking about anyway. And then a month later, you're looking at graffiti all over the walls of Paris that are saying things like, run, comrade, the old world is behind you. Don't liberate me, I'll take care of that. Very in your face kind of things, but very kind of simple. And people would see that and they say, yes. It's like a sort of collective awakening to say, yes, everything is suddenly up in question, like it has not been in my lifetime. And I sort of, I wasn't there, I just read about it, but I kind of had a hint of those things from the 60s and stuff like that. Like, yes, there are occasional breakthroughs here where you feel like you're getting new perspectives and so on. But it was brief. And the closest thing that I have experienced that was like that was the Occupy movement. When that happened, I was saying, oh, there's this little thing going on in Wall Street, Occupy Wall Street, and wouldn't that be great if it spread to one or two other cities? And then the next week it was in 50 other cities. And then a week later it was in 500 other cities. Where did this come from? It was kind of like May 68 in that sense. Nobody had dreamed of this thing, including the people that started it. They thought, well, this is probably going to be another one of our failures. We're going to do a little thing here and it's going to fizzle out, or we'll just get arrested or something. And the thing, when you look at the Occupy movement, there was nobody really leading it. Like people in other places, we had the advantage of internet and stuff like that. So people in other places could see in real time, oh, this is happening in New York and in Chicago or Oakland or wherever. And so they could kind of, say, well, why don't here in Podunkville, why don't we try something like that? And they did, in a lot of like little places in the middle of the most conservative areas, you would see a little Occupy Podunk, or something. and people kind of woke up. It was like very exciting. And what was the program? Well, the program was everything and nothing. They said, well, what are your demands? And we'd say, well, we're not doing demands. What we're doing is saying that our lives, our world there's something very wrong with it. And we don't know what to do exactly, but the first thing we're going to do is gather together and discuss. Just like at various previous times, like before the Declaration of Independence was made, people gathered together and said, well, what are we going to do here? Do we dare do this? In the French Revolution, the same thing, in many other cases like that, that's kind of the first step. And the first step is like that you stop depending on the top down people to tell you what, like the news media or the political leaders or something. Everybody gathers, and it may be kind of chaotic, but the point is that you're playing there with your lives, not in some kind of silly Che Guevara sort of, fantasy or something like this, but you're going someplace and you're trying a new thing. And if it doesn't work, then somebody else will come to the mic and say, well, why don't we try this? And somebody, well, why don't we try, and then how are we going to organize this? And people figure out how to organize things. And they organize by majority rule or by, various forms can take shape. But the point is that the people doing them are the ones that make those forms. And that's something that most political movements don't have. Like I say, most of the ones in the past have been some small core of leaders who offer themselves as alternative governors. Elect us instead of those other guys. We'll do better. Sometimes they do better, but a lot of times they do better, and then it ends up worse because they're more credible and so on. So anyway, so that was something I was involved in. And
wait a minute, what does situationist mean?
Okay, are you familiar with Dadaism and Surrealism as movements?
Yeah, somewhat,
Okay, well, in those two movements, in their different ways, intended to change the world.
Now, why don't you explain briefly what Dadaism and Surrealism are?
Well, Dadaism grew up during World War I as a sort of reaction against the utter idiocy of what was going on. And it was a pretty negative thing.
Right.
They would do just completely random kind of stuff and all this. Then Surrealism came about a decade later in the early 20s with Andre Breton and some of his friends who had been in the Dada scene, who said, no, we want a more positive vision here, not just a sort of nihilist, complain about everything or something. And so they had more of a sense, a program, you might say, but in both cases, those groups intended to change the world. The first Surrealist journal was called La Révolution Surréaliste, the Surrealist Revolution. And what that would consist of might be a bit vague, but it was clear that they intend that to be revolution, changing the society. And then later on, they sort of, try different political things, like Breton becomes a Trotskyist and some of the others become Stalinists. And, they're trying to figure out how to sort of combine their artistic radicality with political radicality. And it didn't happen happily, like it ended up being farcical or something. But anyway, that was their attempt, in earlier times, to either ally so that we would, these different things. But the end result, when there were some people in France in particular, in the late 40s and early 50s, who grew up with this stuff, and they said this stuff failed. And to oversimplify again, Guy Debord, one of the most well-known situationists, who was a young man at that time, said one reason that they failed is that they tried to preserve art. They were artists, whereas the Dadaists had just sort of been purely negative. So later on in his book, The Society of the Spectacle, he said these earlier movements, the problem was that Dadaism wanted to destroy art, or to go beyond art, without realizing it, realizing in the sense of fulfilling it. They just had a negative thing. And then Surrealism wanted to realize art without destroying it, without going beyond it. So he, with those two things, he then said the Situationists have been developing over the last few years. He's writing in the 60s. The idea that we have to do both. In other words, we want to bring the creativity of art into a broader thing, the whole world, so it doesn't just affect how you do something in a frame, like a painting or something like that. And outside the painting, everything goes on as usual. You want to bring there's something interesting in art, which is that it's been the domain of creativity over the centuries. Different kinds of schools, different kinds of art. But the idea is that to the extent that there was like a separate artist type of person or type of, population or something, it was a population that had the unusual freedom to be creative, but only within a certain framework. Mm-hmm. You can paint all kinds of weird stuff and all that, but you can't do the same thing with the city hall. You can't do the same thing with the property, blah, blah, blah. As soon as you step out of that limit, and in fact, usually they didn't step out of those limits. And so they can, the kings and the rulers and the rich people were fine with them being this little lackey position there of providing some entertainment of various levels and kinds. So the Situationists are saying, we like that creativity, but we aren't going to buy that anymore, that's okay in itself, that's going to do the trick, because we've seen what happened in Surrealism. They did some interesting paintings and all that, and the paintings ended up in museums and rich people's homes. So what? That did not change the world. I mean, all you can do is like, okay, it changed some notions about the world or something in a kind of vague way. And so they said, we don't want to create works of art. We want to create situations. And that was this sort of hypothetical thing that meant we want to create stuff going on in the world. And a situation could be defined as something that goes beyond itself. It's not bound. It could be, you could focus on something and say, well, here they had a party, they had a little disruption here or something like that. But the ultimate situation would be a real revolution that would be never ending. It would be impinging on private property, on state authority, on, all these various things that make up our social order. And it's when, so they could say, okay, that's sort of ultimate goal. But as on the way there, that was also the means that one of the means was to do these creative things in a larger context. And that might, and if you follow the implications of that, you end up having, you end up having to talk about revolution and what that consists of, and saying, why have previous revolutions failed? How do you envision it in a different way, and so on? How do you envision your organization? What part does that play? And one of the parts would be, well, maybe our part is not to lead a revolution, but it certainly is to provoke thought, to provoke experiment, and so on, to keep pulling the rug out from any incipient authority that might crop up. This kind of things.
Yeah.
So I think you can see, and this is to sort of make a big leap here, that in some regards, the Situationists politically were kind of like Zen is religiously. Take it with a big grain of salt here. But what I mean is, if you look at some of the Zen stories, the koans, these different things, they are rather untypical of religious movements, which usually are sort of a little more straightforward and, building up, positive statements about, God is this, or you should do this or something. And in Zen, it may have an element of that, but it also has elements like, does a dog have Buddha nature? No. What are you talking about? Yeah, like, so you have to examine that and see what is the context when that person said that. And the obvious thing, without going into further detail, is that the context was a student is asking this, and the master has perceived, or at least has the impression, that the student is ripe for something if he will only give up his clinging to the, some Buddhist ideal or something like that. And so it may be a part of that to like slap in the face, stop it, and again, I'm oversimplifying, and I'm not saying that I understand all these koans or anything like that, but I think you can see that Zen people, when confronted with outside people complaining about what they're like, in a way, you also have to think, oh, they think we're just criticizing all the time. They don't take us seriously because we're making these wise-ass remarks about, like I say, the dog does have Buddha nature, so why do they say it doesn't, et cetera, et cetera. So again, vastly different realms and contexts, but it might help you to understand a little bit, to think of the Situationists as being somewhat analogous to that. Like they're hard to pigeonhole. And, they are a political group. They have political, economic perspectives, et cetera, et cetera. And, they were not without studying, just like Zen people study the sutras, et cetera.
Yeah.
But in certain specific contexts, they will do something or say something or attack an issue in a certain way that might be rather unexpected. And you would think, well, what are they? They're being very rude here, or are they just being negative, or are they hateful people, or what's going on? And basically what they're doing is trying to decondition people who may be too susceptible to hero worship or to, following leaders or whatever the case may be. And implicitly under that is a very positive thing. You're trying to get people to, hey, make your own life.
Yeah.
But it's not so simple to say, make your own life, go out and form a commune or blah, 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 or something. But it means like you only have this one life. What are you going to do with it? And, if you're thinking that your life is just, to work a certain amount to have enough money to be able to pay the rent or, and you're afraid to do anything lest that, partial security go away or something like that, like again, some of these graffiti from May 68 are very revelatory.
Mm.
One of them from around May 20th or something, so this has been going on for a week or two. One of them says, already 10 days of happiness. So it's like somebody has, and people look at that and say, yes, I haven't really been happy before most of my life. And suddenly, yeah, think about what we've been doing the last week. It's exciting. And I kind of felt like that in a moderate way during the Occupy movement for about a month. That was like the happiest time of my life, like September, October 2011, because with all the chaotic stuff and some negative things and all that, it was like I felt, and other people spontaneously said, yeah, it says like I feel like a big burden has been taken off my back. What off of, well, just what we're doing, what's going on in the world. It's like suddenly we realize that we don't have to do business as usual. And it's easy for us to say that now because we are in a business as usual thing. You can't just arbitrarily say, I declare we're going to be liberated now. But when it's actually starting to happen, you can get the sense like, oh, yes, that potentiality has been there all the time. And again, if you go back to Zen, you will say, well, what are you gaining from Zen? And sometimes teachers will say, well, you're not gaining anything. This was already there.
Yeah.
You just didn't know
Definitely.
I mean, you didn't add anything to your person
Right.
to make it something. If anything, you took some stuff away, sort of cluttering things up or something.
Right.
And then you could say, hey, there's a lot more possibilities than I thought before.
Yeah. Now, one thing I remember about the May 68 event in France that I heard personally from someone who was there is there was a lot of police violence.
Sure. But again, well, that's when I first heard about May 68, I thought, well, that's probably it's demonstrations in the street and police are beating people up. So that's kind of like what's happening here in the US.
Yeah.
So I thought, oh, yeah, okay. And it wasn't until I started reading the anarchists and then later the situationists that I realized there was all this other stuff going on that wasn't going on in America or in other countries. Because that led to the factory occupations and occupation of the Sorbonne and all sorts of other things like that. So the police, I mean, that's a little part, but see, that's an example of something that was predictable.
Yeah.
I mean, what else is new? If police beating people up was all you needed, we would have had revolutions centuries ago.
Yeah.
But that's just a thing that might, under certain circumstances, trigger something, or it might crush something.
Right.
Just more often than not. So anyway, I want to get away from this political stuff and get back, but this gives some context because I was involved in this sort of stuff. And so not paying much attention to Zen or even Rexroth or something who was sort of halfway in that thing. So I I eventually, I continued to put out some pamphlets and leaflets and so on over there. And then in 1981, I came out with this volume. It's
Hold
a
it back
huge
more.
anthology.
Yeah, I have that too. Situationist International Anthology.
This is actually a revised. I put that out in 1981, and then this is an expanded, revised version from 2006.
Did you translate from French?
Yes, I translate. That's right, from French. See, once I discovered the Situationist, there wasn't very much in English, and I desperately wanted to find this, and so did all my friends, who were in this. And so we had to learn French, basically, because that's where these nitty-gritty articles were and all this other stuff. And then I went to France, my first time out of the country in 1971, and had studied a little, so I could sort of talk to people in French, not very well. But meet some of these people in Paris and in London a little bit and so on. And then some of them came to the Bay Area to meet us. And little by little over the years, we have more and more connections, and we're translating each other's things, a pamphlet or this or that. And so by the time I did this anthology, I had been by that time, my French is pretty good. And plus I've got French people to help me explain, if there's something obscure. And I did this and published it. And I ended up self-publishing it because publishers said, oh, no, nobody's going to be interested in this stuff. And that was 40 years ago. And it has sold steadily ever since that time. I mean, this is the 5th printing. So anyway, it's very powerful. And I ended up doing other things. But anyway, so once I had done this was kind of like, okay, big achievement, now I can sort of take a break here. I've this stuff is out there, it can do its work, whatever. And so then that's when I went back to Rexroth, thinking, well, there were also some problems with this, and Rexroth sort of had a little more humanistic thing that was kind of half political, radical, but also spiritual and so on like that. You're familiar with Rexroth, I assume so.
Yeah, a little tiny bit.
Okay. Well, anyway, he was like my other big influence besides the Situationists. And they were somewhat different, but they overlapped in some ways. So I ended up writing this little book about him. Came out in 1990.
The Relevance of Rexroth.
Yeah. And that was sort of my effort to say, well, what do I agree with about Rexroth? And maybe in some cases I agree with him rather than the Situationists, although in other cases vice versa. So that was kind of like my accounting with my two big influences. But meanwhile, in 1985, for one reason or another, I thought, I haven't done any Zazen for a while. I'd kind of been just sort of looking around, what am I going to do next? And so I went back to Berkeley Zen Center, where I hadn't been, except, like I say, every few years I might pop in for a little bit. And I thought, I went there, and, at the new location, they had shifted to a larger thing with several buildings. And I thought, this is excellent. Mel, meanwhile, has become, a teacher.
Yeah.
At that point, he had just gotten Dharma transmission, a year or two before. And I had known him in the, 1967. So anyway, I thought this was fine. So I thought, I'm going to go here every day. In the past, I haven't been very regular, and, I just sort of So they had afternoon sittings, so it wasn't, I went there every afternoon for about a year
At
and a
what
half.
time?
This was 85.
No. What time in the afternoon?
Oh, like 5:40
Right,
to 6:30.
right.
Yeah. So, a period of Zazen followed by the Heart Sutra,
Yeah,
basically. And then on Saturday, similar to San Francisco, they would have an expanded program where you could go there and eat breakfast and have a couple things, a little work period, and then have a lecture. And then after the lecture, have tea and cookies.
right.
So it kind of made a nice little doable thing that was a little bit sesshin-like. It gave you a little, you were getting oryoki plus multiple zazen periods, and
Yeah.
so I would go to that also, and then I started going to their sessions, the 1 day things that they had every month, and I liked that. And then, I went to my first Rohatsu in 1986, December, and I liked that.
7-day session starting December 1st. Not everybody would know what Rohatsu means.
Yeah. It's a 7-day session that is celebrating supposedly Buddha's Enlightenment Day. I mean, who knows when it actually...
Oh, yeah, absolutely, yeah.
And then I got a little OD'd in early 87 and sort of dropped out a little bit. I had been doing some work for them. I was a bookkeeper and doing the newsletter and stuff. Anyway, I thought, oh, this is kind of taking over my life. And so I stopped for a few months. But then I thought, well, there's no reason why I can't still do sessions, the long sessions, which is what I really liked. So I merged back in, I said, here I am, and so I did another Rohatsu, and, the other like the 5-day session in May or June, whenever it is.
That's not Rohatsu. Rohatsu only
Right.
December 1st.
Right. But this is the other big session that we did in Bcc. Right. I don't know if that's a standard thing or not. And anyway, so I got back into it, and then I decided to go to Tassajara. And, my friend Alan Sanoki, who was there around the same time that I'd come, he was there about a year or two before me. I think it started maybe in 83 or something, had been there for a practice period in spring of 1988. And he came back and, how does this work out? And so, and like the jokes go, like I said, well, gosh, if he could do it, surely I can.
Yeah, right.
Before then, I was still rather intimidated about, gosh, it's like every day and you're getting, for all this.
Mm-hmm.
But I thought, I think I could do this. I did the 7-day thing. This is just sort of like more of the same, probably. And so I went to Tassajara just to kind of check it out. I went to a work period thing in the summer.
Yeah.
And I liked it. And so I signed up for the fall 88 practice period and did that. And that was just great. It's the only one I ever did. But, it was like, wow, this is something I've always wanted to do, and I was able to do it. And it was pretty much like I had imagined it, like it was just sort of pushing the long session thing a little farther. So it becomes sort of like your whole life, for a few months. And so I did that. And ever since then, so that's like more than 30 years ago, I do my morning zazen at home. Just, I get up and do 20-minute zazen or something every day. But I would go to Saturday programs and sessions, especially the longer sessions, where I feel you can one day sesshin is kind of frustrating to me because by the time you get into it, it's all over.
Mm-hmm.
When you didn't get any sleep the night before. But the longer sessions, you forcibly get in the rhythm, because if you're tired, you just go and you clunk out.
Right.
You don't have any trouble getting to sleep like you might have done the first day or something. And so after 3 or 4 days, you're just in the rhythm, and it even so a little bit more like you get in practice periods or something like that. And so that's what I've been doing for the last 30 plus years until the COVID kicked in. Which now they've started to open it up for in person, but we've been doing things on Zoom mostly. Like, so every Saturday I listen to a lecture, and we occasionally have meetings on Zoom and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, once I was back into this thing, like after Tassajara, or even a little bit before, I had a friend, one of my friend Sam's poet friends, who was a friend of Gary Snyder's. He had also taken that class back in the 60s. And when Gary Snyder came back from Japan permanently with his Japanese wife, as you know, they got some land out in the Nevada City area in the Sierra foothills and built a house there. And my friend helped Snyder build the house. And they ended up founding the Ring of Bones Zendo a few years later in the maybe late 70s or something like that, I think. And they ended up, probably especially Snyder, inventing this form called Mountains and Rivers Sesshin, based on Dogen's Mountains and Rivers Sutra. And those people are really, wilderness savvy people, much more than I am. So they would just go out backpacking, and hike and then camp and then do zazen. And so over the years, they kind of developed this form that worked, that would combine these rather potentially contradictory things. So via my friend, his name is Will Staple, I don't know if you know him, he said, oh, well, they have these annual Ring of Bone Mountains and Rivers sessions that last 7 days, only they're hiking, instead of in a zendo. And he says, we got an opening here. So I went on one of those in 1993 and was very impressed. I was sort of in their hands because I wasn't that, I'd gone hiking, but, they just told me what to do and, what equipment to bring and all that. And so I went on 2 more of those in the 90s, and I went back to BCC and I told Mel about this. And I said, this is a really great form, genre, and maybe we could do a sort of junior version of it. And we could go to Point Reyes just for one night. So it's kind of a city slickers version of this, that was accessible to people, even if they were not, seasoned hikers and all that. And so later in the 90s, we did do that a few times. And in 2000, I ended up being appointed the sesshin director for them, after being a sort of advisor to the previous people who had never done the stuff before. And so that worked out great. I did that for 15 years.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. And like I say, I'm not a regular hiker and camper type of person. I've done it before, but when I think, oh, I've got some free time, what do I do? Some of my friends would say, oh, well, let's go backpacking. For me, I said, no, I want to play tennis or work on my website or something. It's not my normal thing, but I had done enough of it. And plus being at the Ring of Bone thing so that I knew the rhythm and I knew the kind of program and why things worked and why you don't sit zazen during the afternoon and why you bring this kind of food to cook because blah, blah, blah,
Yeah.
So by the time I was in charge in 2000, then I really sort of whipped the schedule into shape, again, with kind of input from my Ring of Bone experience, and, got an exact, like we're getting up at, 5 o'clock and we're doing X number of zazens, and here's how we're doing the serving, and here's, and making all these adjustments that you have to make. Like we sort of do an orioki type thing, but more simple.
Yeah.
Just with 2 bowls, and it doesn't have all the gewgaws, that but it's the same idea. You're eating in silence,
Yeah.
and serving, the bows and stuff like that, but just in a little funkier thing, because you're cooking, in much more primitive circumstances. And so the ceremonies are reduced somewhat and made, So anyway, I did that, and we actually, at a certain time, were doing 2 of them every year, and we eventually ended up doing 3 and 4 day sessions instead of just the 2-day, by popular demand. People wanted, once they've gone to all this trouble to get out there, they want to, stay a little longer.
Mm-hmm.
And so that worked out great. It was a tremendous responsibility. I mean, it was a lot of work for me because I was organizing everything, and I was calling them, and making sure they're on time. The cooks had the right recipes, and somebody was, there were just a lot of things you don't have to deal with in a normal session because it's sort of already been done for 100 years.
Right.
Sort of fill in the slots. Whereas in this case, you had to say, well, what happens when you get out to Point Reyes and somebody's missing? That kind of thing doesn't occur at a normal session. You just appoint somebody else and you don't worry about it, So you've got first aid issues, like if somebody hurts themselves, all that. So anyway, it was a lot of responsibility, but it was very rewarding. And I just kept doing that and doing that and doing that. And, finally, after 15 years of it, in 2014, I finally said, I'm stepping down. I mean, I thought I would still be there on my deathbed if I didn't, because I had sort of developed into a thing where I was the natural guy to do it, because I was the guy who knew how to do all this stuff. And, I had enough time because I didn't have a full-time job and blah, blah, blah. So, but anyway, finally I resigned and younger people took over. I sort of did a transitional Dharma transmission to some younger women, actually in their 40s rather than me in my 60s. And so they took that over.
Yeah.
And then since 2016, I've been the Bcc Newsletter Editor.
Oh, really?
And again, that's a much simpler thing, but it has its headaches. Every 2 months, you've got to spend a week or two, getting the articles and proofreading them and laying them out and all that, dealing with some of the little politics that enters into some of these things.
Yeah.
But it's something for me to do, and I can do that from home. So I've continued to do that. So those are the 2 big things. The real big thing is the mountains and rivers thing. That was like a career.
Yeah.
Sort of thing. But I'm really glad I did it. I made a lot of good friends that way. Because one thing that a mountains and rivers session is different than a regular session is that there is some talking. It's just, and again, I learned that from Ring of Bone. It wouldn't work to just be silent all the time when you're hiking and you need help, and so what they do is while you're hiking, it's silent. But when you stop for lunch, then you can chat. And then you hike in silence again. When you get at camp and are setting up your tents and all that, you can talk. You're getting there like early afternoon or mid-afternoon. And you're just kind of hanging out low key. You go to the beach or do whatever. And then starting with the afternoon zazen, like at 5 o'clock or something like that, it's silent. And then you're eating dinner in silence, which is served in that ritualistic way. And then after that, there's a short break. And then you hike to the beach, which is right there, in silence, and do 2 zazen periods on the beach, sitting on your sleeping bag with your other thing underneath for the zabuton. And we're lined up facing the ocean, maybe 30 or 40 feet back from where the waves are coming in, just on a beach in a line. And we're doing 2 periods of zazen like that in the evening. It's just beautiful. And there, what we would do, or what I would do anyway, is that instead of following our breath, we followed the waves. And you could try to follow your breath, but it seems more natural to follow the ocean's breathing. So the ocean is just, so you're doing that for 40 minutes, and then some kinhen, and then another 40 minutes, and then you go back and sleep in your tent overnight. And the next morning at 5 o'clock, you get up and start over,
Yeah.
But just in the morning, you have a zazen period or 2, and then you have breakfast, and then you have a study period where normally we read the Mountains and Rivers Sesshin, but sometimes some other text.
Sutra.
And then after that, talking is okay. Again, so from late morning until sort of late afternoon, you're in a talking mode. And, people make a picnic lunch and go to the beach or go hiking or take a nap or have a dokusan if there's somebody like Mel there. So, but in other words, there's enough, you're doing a sesshin kind of stuff, but there are also periods there where you're sitting with somebody and chatting with somebody. And so you get to know people like you would not know if you were in Rohatsu with somebody.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's a different thing, and in a way that's more difficult because once you get started talking, at a sesshin, it's more specific, and that you're not supposed to talk.
Right.
So anyway, that was that's some of my interaction there. I'm still very fond of the Berkeley Zen Center and Mel. I mentioned that book. Some other people had helped Mel to edit this book during his last year or 2 of life. He died when he was about 92, I think about a year and a half ago. And when he died, they were pretty much, it's a collection of selections from his lectures plus a memoir of his life. And those 2 things, the memoir is like the first 80 pages or something, and then there's a couple hundred pages of lectures. And so that was on there, and that's what I mentioned, like I was doing some sort of last minute, proofing or, suggesting maybe we should leave out this sentence or change this or something. And now it has gone to the publisher. So it'll be out sometime next year.
Counterpoint.
Yes. And that guy,
Jack.
What is his name? Jack Shoemaker. Is at that end, he's the editor. I mean, he's taking it, and then he'll come back and say, we need to make these changes or something. But anyway, I can say that I was very pleased with the book. We had some arguments, about what should be in it or this or that. But in general, I think it's a very good book. It really does give the flavor of Mel, which is a very distinct flavor that's not like many other Zen teachers.
That's right.
I mean,
Yeah.
it's just very, I almost wanted to call it nothing special, except somebody else has already used that title. But, you know, it's just a very down-to-earth, solid thing, and yet very solid, you know, very insightful guy, but, you know, without many of these pretensions.
No kidding.
You know, that tend to
Yeah. Yeah, definitely.
So, yeah, so I see that we've taken up now about an hour and a half.
Yeah, well, let me
so
say something. I've been getting your emails since, you know, I was born, or a long time. And one thing I definitely have noticed is the enormous amount of material you have published, or written about, or translated, because you're just putting it up all the time. A lot of it, I don't know. I mean, there was a lot about Kenneth Rexroth. There was a tremendous, the guy, you pronounce his name, to me, it was Guy Debord, but.
Yeah, Guy Debord.
Guy Debord. Number of times I read little things, you know, you put about him. But there's been a continual flow from you, an enormous amount. And recently, either I guess you just said it in an email, your archives went where?
To Yale.
Yale.
The Beinecke library of, you know, rare books and manuscripts.
Well, that's wonderful. Just curious. Did they buy it?
Yes.
Oh, good for you.
For a pleasantly extravagant amount.
Oh, excellent. Excellent.
Yeah. So it was win-win.
Yeah.
You know, I got me out of it. And I mean, that was like 50 years of stuff, you know, thousands of, you know, documents and all this. And now it's all in one place.
Yeah.
And it's in the same place where many other comparable collections are from some of these European folks. So if somebody is researching them, they're going to go to Yale anyway. And so my stuff sort of filled in a little gap with, you know, more American stuff, but I had a lot of French stuff in there too.
Yeah.
So that was nice. And so where you heard about that was that during I prepared a huge inventory or catalog of all the material so that people can, first of all, just see what's there, and just for bibliographical interest. And then if they're going to Yale, or if I think they will ultimately be able to order copies of, you know, oh, I want a copy of this leaflet. That sounds interesting.
What about your website? Didn't your website contain a tremendous amount of what's in the archive at Yale?
It does, yeah. But I mean, the archive contains thousands of letters, and none of them are on my website, for example. It contains thousands of pamphlets and journals and stuff in French as well as English and some other languages. And most of that is not on my website. My website just includes a very select things that I've translated. So I've picked like that anthology, and I have you know, here's Guy Debord's film scripts that I translated.
Oh, neat.
And here's his Society of the Spectacle that I translated. This is a Vietnam friend of mine who I met in Paris.
What's it called? Wait a minute. In the Crossfire.
In the Crossfire, Adventures of a Vietnamese Revolutionary. And he was not the Ho Chi Minh type of revolutionary who he detested. So it's like, this was something that my situationist oriented friends led me to in France. And I read this and I said, wow, this is fascinating. And nobody knows about this stuff. This is like Vietnam in the 20s and 30s and 40s, like during World War II. So translated that, and then my own things. This is most of my works in French.
Secrets Publics.
Secret Public.
Mm-hmm. And hey, how do you pronounce your last name? I'd say Knabb.
No, it's Knabb.
Knabb. Yeah, I thought it probably was, but I like the KN. Knabb.
Well, I think if it was from German, it might be. It's Knabb is the Dutch version of Knabe. I don't know. So I guess some of my ancestors are from Holland.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe they did pronounce it, but
it's just Knabb. Yeah. Yeah.
Knabb.
Yeah. Well, this is my favorite type of podcast where you know what to say. And it's been really fascinating. And I have learned things. Let me ask you, what do you think about the situation with climate change?
I don't know that I have any new thing to say. I mean, that you don't already know. I think it's scary. I mean, hopefully we can weasel our way out of it somewhere, but it's not very promising when leading people all over the world are going in the exact opposite direction. Mm-hmm. It's kind of like the Titanic heading for the iceberg, and they're saying, no, it's a fake, full speed.
That's great.
I mean, God, you know.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I lean towards optimism compared with some of my friends and so on. I say, you know, I mean, I call on things like the Occupy movement, you know, as people are still, you know, there's some potential still there, you know, and people can wake up. But I have to say, you know, like when you go on year after year and you get, you know, these politicians and other people that are in power now, you know, it's just
yeah.
Some of that is going to be irreversible. I mean, we may have already passed the point, but we're certainly going to pass it pretty soon if we haven't, where we can't go back in the other direction because it'll get hotter and the hotter will make it hotter.
Yeah.
You know, and the ocean, the things will get killed and they'll go extinct and they won't come back. And then we won't have, you know, the insects, in which case we won't have birds that eat the insects, in which case, you know, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, all these things, you know, have potential for, you know.
Yeah.
So, I mean, in that sense, you know, I try to not personally freak out. I mean, I'm aware of this stuff. I've been aware of it for 50 years. I mean, Rexroth was already talking about these things back in the 50s.
Oh, good for him.
You know, like, I mean, he was talking about ecology before people knew what it meant. And that. So, I mean, I was aware, and some people, like, especially since Gary Snyder and people like that in the 60s, of those issues. But meanwhile, I mean, my personal strategy has been like, you've seen these various things that I've written and so on, and it may seem like a lot, but remember that's for 50 years. Like actually, as writers go, I haven't written that much. You know, I've written one book and a few other pamphlets.
Well, you have piled up a bunch more than one book.
That's true. I mean, if this was up through the 1990s.
Public Secrets.
So I could put out another volume. This is like a 400-page book, and if I wasn't online, I could put a volume 2 of this. But still, it's not as if I'm writing like churning out stuff all the time. But basically, I just coast along, and if something attracts my interest, like, and I think I have something to say about that, that is not being said, because if it's already being said, you know what I mean, then what I can do is sort of just clarify, like, people are talking about these things, and let me see if I can sum up the gist.
Yeah.
What people are, something. So when I do see, when some event happens, then I plunge in and I'm obsessed. Like when the Iranian Revolution happened back in 77 or something, 79 or something. For months I was doing nothing but reading all this, meeting all that, and then I put out one little article that would take up about 3 pages. That was like 3 months' work. But I thought this is summing this up helpfully. When the Gulf War happened, similar thing. I mean, I spent several months, and then I put out this little 4-page thing called The War and the Spectacle in 1992 or whenever it was. And when there were a couple things in France that happened, and I did an article about them. And then when the Occupy movement happened, I did several things like that. Like, I was totally immersed in that. And I wrote what I think are some pretty good analyses of this that are not boring. They tell, and they were at the time, like when the Occupy Oakland and all these other things were going on with tens of thousands of people, I was there handing out this leaflet. But it was not like you think of the typical political group. Oh, they're just handing out their propaganda every day as a new blah, blah. It's just like this one little leaflet.
Yeah.
But that little leaflet got viewed more than 50,000 times on my website. And that's that I know of, to say nothing about the fact that it got translated and all that. So those kind of things, like the reactions I get, say, okay, I hit a nerve here. And people are saying, Jules Pfeiffer.
Oh, certainly.
So he was, I think he's probably dead now, but
I would imagine.
He was alive. Yeah. He was alive then, and he was on my email list. And so I sent out this thing, and I got an email from him that had the sum total of the email was, thank you. So I mean, he was somebody, from coming from a different scene, but he was like, so anyway, I do get feedback that says, okay, you've expressed, as the Situationist said, our ideas are in everybody's minds.
Yeah, that's good.
So it's not like we're doing something original, but what we're doing, if anything, is sort of bringing to a focus the kind of things that people are actually doing.
Yeah.
And when those workers were occupying their factories in France, the Situationist leaflets would sometimes say things to the effect, he says, this movement lacks nothing but except the consciousness of what it has already done. In other words, these people had done this thing, which itself was a message. And they themselves were confused. They would, the day before, they weren't even thinking about it, but they've done something. And what they have done is already more eloquent and more to the point than most articles about it and all that. But what they need to do, is to be aware of what they have done.
Yeah.
In other words, you have implicitly critiqued the state, authority, higierarchy, et cetera. Don't be shy. That's what you've done. You ignored your would-be leaders and you did this. So if you know what you did, then you can do without those people. If you don't know what you've done, then those people can insinuate their way back in and sort of take over what you've done and say, okay, now we've had a great factory occupation, but now it's time to go back to work. We've won a lot of gains thanks to our experience, blah, blah, blah. So that's what I try to do, and what my colleagues or comrades or friends, whatever you want to call them around the world, tried to do in similar situations. And so, when the Trump election happened, this ridiculous thing, I came out with a thing that's maybe 3 or 4 pages long after it was done. And of course, I was sick about the whole thing, but I said, well, let's look at this and see what's, there's also some positive aspects. My thing with the Trump thing, which I think has been verified, I said, actually, this election, I'm talking in 2016, may seem like, oh, the Republicans have da-da-da, but I think this is actually very bad for them. And that may seem kind of odd because now they're in control of this or this or this. But think about the case of the dog chasing the car. What happens when the dog catches the car?
Uh-huh.
And it's gripping on the bumper of the car or something. Well, it's complete, and so that's kind of what's happened.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, that was one of my little thoughts there that was not original to me. Other people kind of said the same thing. And then when COVID kicked in, once again, I followed in that case. I thought, well, this is a mess, but it's also interesting, like how people are reacting to this online and in various ways. And in a way, we've had more global dialogue since that happened than we ever had before. And that's because for a few months, people were almost limited to online debates. What's going on here? What are we going to do?
Yeah.
What's the real authentic thing about this and this and this, and so I wrote about that, and all those things are at my website. But when I'm not doing something like that, then I'm just coasting like anybody else. And my latest thing in the last few years has been leading this classics book group. Where we've been, it started out just in Berkeley, but now it's on Zoom. We started out reading Don Quixote and Montaigne, Rabelais, things like that, Pilgrim's Progress, Gulliver's Travels, and moving on through those things into the 19th century, like Stendhal and Madame Bovary, Baudelaire, Rimbaud, etc. And
how do people find it?
The simplest way, if people go to my website, which you can look up as, if you look up Ken Knabb, you'll get my website.
Bob Secrets.
Or Bureau of Public Secrets. If you go to my website, my email is there. It's like at the bottom of every page.
Yeah, okay.
So people can email me and say, hey, tell me about this. And now that we're on Zoom, I mean, you can even be in other countries, and we've some people in other countries, but if somebody's interested. And so what we've done, I mentioned these various European classics and so on. Then this year we've been doing all Asian classics. Just like I sort of followed through a European, thing from the Renaissance to the 20th century, and got some things like that I thought that I like a lot, that I like to reread and can be helpful in this. So then I thought, okay, now for the next 2 or 3 years, we will do other things. And so this year we started out with the Bhagavad Gita and the book What Buddha Taught.
Oh yeah.
By, I forget what the guy's name, but the book.
Oh yeah.
And so both of those had 2 meetings each. We meet every other week. So that would take two. And then we had 2 meetings for the Tao Te Ching, 2 meetings for Chuangzi, 2 meetings for Zen Flesh, Zen Bones, mainly the stories.
Oh, yeah.
And 2 meetings for Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind. And then after we had done that, that's like the first 6 months or so, then we shifted to more literature. And we did 4 meetings of Chinese poetry, like Tu Fu and Li Po and the, Book of Songs and stuff like that. And then just in the last 2 months, we've been doing Basho. We did 2 meetings of Basho's haikus. And then we're now in the middle of 2 meetings of his little travel book called The Narrow Road to the Interior. Has various other translations, Narrow Road to the North. And then when we're done with that, we're going to be doing Women Poets of Japan and China, which have been translated by Rexroth. And then after that, we're going to do an abridged version of The Dream of the Red Chamber, China's greatest novel. And then next year, we're going to do a lot of ancient Greek stuff, Herodotus and Sappho and so on. And then a year after that, we're going to be doing a lot of more folkloric stuff.
Wow.
Like folk epics like the Kalevala and Jarl's Saga, and ending up with British and American folk songs.
Oh, nice.
So, and that I haven't gone any farther than that, but that's like a 9-year program that I sketched out for myself about 7 years ago. Tentatively.
Wow.
And
that's impressive.
We've got a great little group, we had a nice local group that was fun, where we were eating wine and sandwiches at a bookstore and all this. But when we had to stop that, we've actually gotten more people through the Zoom thing.
Yeah, I hear that.
And you can see, as we're talking here, I know that you're around the world, but I don't have to say, oh, I'm just talking to an image. We're having a conversation, and I can see when you smile. If I say something, it's a little different than being on just a phone.
Yeah, this is the only podcast I've done with Zoom. Every other one has been more like a phone call. And
I know that people are used to that, but it's just I've gotten used. Like if we had been doing the same thing on the phone, it would have seemed a little bit more distant. Are you there?
Yeah, right. No, I can understand. I have a question. What do you think about Noam Chomsky?
I like him. I actually I've made a few critiques of him in the sense of him being a little bit more, shall we say, traditional in an academic sense, in the sense that you tell people the truth about things.
Yes.
You reveal that some politician has been lying, or the newspaper didn't report it right or something. So that's all well and good.
Yeah.
But you sort of assume that that's the main thing to do. It's a good thing to do.
Yeah.
So I have no thing with that. But I think one thing that the people like the Situationists had that kind of went beyond that is that, yes, they would do that sometimes. They would assume that, but they would also take into account the sort of Wilhelm Reich kind of things. They would take into account that mere information on its own is not going to solve everything.
Right.
That people, and we've seen that in the last few years, especially about Trump, but even with George Bush and all that before, but especially with Trump, you see, or his followers, you see that you can provide information, and if there's something in their gut that goes against that, they're going to ignore it. They may cling to him all the more strongly.
Yeah.
And there will be a limit. I think that, if he ends up being, convicted of more non-political fraud, like convicted of business fraud or something, just crude business as usual criminality, maybe something
Oh
like
boy,
that.
that's
But,
optimistic.
people,
I
people will, uh, you know, so Reich had this sense, maybe a little too much in his psychological, sexual sort of thing, but he had the sense like, look, people are conditioned, and part of the way they're conditioned is sexually, like by sexual repression, so that they're sort of neurotic, they're inhibited, they don't dare to do this, and there are things that enter into that has nothing to do with information. So it's not, people didn't go for, and Reich was writing under Hitler, and about that, people didn't go for Hitler because Hitler gave them accurate information.
No.
Because there were other people saying, well, no, that's not true. The Jews didn't do this. Or so, I mean, there were lots of lies in there.
Yeah.
But Hitler and his, group knew how to play on things so that it's like you build up a scapegoat, you build up some energy, but then you direct it in this sort of perverted direction.
Yeah.
But it's based on, there were communists and socialists, I should say Stalinists and socialists in Germany at that same time, and you would think they had a much more logical program to offer people. Instead of just saying kill the Jews or something, you could say, well, what about these economic issues, or what this or that? But the socialists and the communists were just giving boring speeches and assuming that Hitler, was just an idiot, an insane person, and nobody's going to believe that kind of stuff. And who was proven right in that, the Nazis were easily victorious over them, and ended up killing or arresting all the leftist people and so on.
Mm-hmm.
And so Reich is saying these traditional leftist sort of speech making and articles and all this kind of thing is not sufficient. You have to look at people's insides, psychological and even physical. And the insides are that people are really screwed up, and they're screwed up for good reasons under capitalism and authoritarian regimes or something. They're repressed in various ways. And then sort of intuitively, the people in control have sort of learned that they can keep them going that way by advertising, by constant propaganda, by and when they do, but the Nazis could take legitimate aspirations of people, like aspirations for community, for cooperation, and turn that against itself. So if you ever watch these films about Nazi rallies, they're really beautiful. It's like really dramatic, and everybody's together.
Yeah.
And if you were in the middle of that, you would say, wow, this is like a big group orgasm.
Yeah.
And so if somebody else is saying, oh, but the economy is doing this, yeah, you're not going to know what that is. And if you did know, you wouldn't care, because it sounds like, wow, these guys are really bringing the country together. Yay.
Yeah.
Like I say, it's like an orgasm.
Yeah.
It's like a larger version of what people do when they go to a football game or a soccer game or something and get so carried away.
Yeah.
In that case, it's sort of an innocent carried away because the outcome doesn't really matter. But with this political thing, the Nazis were using a lot of those same things. And so Reich had some sense, that we need to look deeper here. And I think the situationists who admired Reich in some ways, not his orgone stuff, but, they pointed him as an example of somebody that was getting below the surface, which the traditional political groups were not.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's really all quite interesting. I think like we're a little over 2 hours now, and I've got a much better idea of where you're at and where you've been.
Well, I want to thank you for persisting here. To say this is open-ended and do this.
Yeah, no, it's good. I like it.
But you've done so much work. I mean, you talk about all the stuff I've done. What you've done regarding Suzuki Roshi and related stuff is just utterly astonishing, quantitatively as well as qualitatively.
Oh, really? I sort of thought, wow, I wish I could do as much as he's doing. See,
No. You've done far more. There's, you may have the impression that I've got a lot of stuff, and maybe I've put a lot of stuff out there, but I mean, I haven't dealt even remotely with I mean, you've dealt with probably hundreds of people, maybe more
than that. Yeah.
Not only with these podcasts, but in collecting lectures and then having them transcribed and having somebody research this and
right.
That's humongous.
Yeah, I can't keep up with it.
You're at the heart of it. I know other people are involved, but you've been the guy doing it for more than 50 years.
And well, like you said, other people involved. There's other people doing as much as I'm doing who work with me. One person, mainly Peter Fort, but Wendy Piercing has been doing a lot, and there's things that aren't really Cuke archives, like Shundo David Hayes. He's been working on Suzuki Roshi lectures a lot. But we share the information back and forth. He's with a thing called Engaged Wisdom that Charlie Wilson started. He's got a good studio, and he's done a lot with the Shunryu Suzuki lecture archive. But anyway, well, thanks. Keep up the good work. Yeah, very impressive all you've done.
You too.
Wonderful.
I have a one of the things on my site is a list of recommended books.
Mm-hmm.
Literature, revolution, whatever. And in the Buddhism section, I have your Cuke biography.
Crooked Cucumber.
And also,
Crooked
Cucumber and hello, thank you, and okay, or whatever.
Yeah, well, good for you. Thank you. You have excellent taste. I salute you.
I said about that, I said there's a lot of interesting accounts of people's Zen experiences, but most of them take themselves too seriously, in my view.
Right.
Here is an exception. And then I
oh, thank you.
This is a breath of fresh air.
Yeah. I just finished an audiobook for it. Thank you, and okay. It's it should appear on Audible and Amazon soon. Shambhala did it, and they put up Crooked Cucumber last year.
Good. So, I have read aloud one or two of your chapters where you had your driver's license experience.
Yes.
I thought that was such a
yeah.
And people invariably crack up.
Yeah. People say, "Oh, we'd like you to write something," and I go, "All right." I actually don't like to write things when people get a hold of me and ask me to do something.
Yeah.
They said, "Well, can you write something again like the driver's license chapter from Thank You and Okay?" Or if I write some,
that's hard to read. That's a hard act.
No, it is.
that had to be.
Yeah. Indeed. Okay, Ken.
Well, anyway, David, thank you again so much for organizing this. And we'll keep in touch about what we're doing with the things, or if the recordings worked out okay or something.
Yeah, yeah.
Definitely keep up the good work. It's appreciated by thousands of people all over the world.
Really. Well,
yeah.
Well, I'm glad I can be of some fleeting use.
Well, I think it's more than fleeting.
Well,
I mean,
I sort of think of everything as like writing the little poem on a leaf and putting it in a creek.
Well, true, in a sense, yes. Yeah, I mean, maybe thousands of years from now, it will not be, but I mean, you've got an online archive. Just, there's a lot of material that can keep on going, even.
Yeah. I've had people talk to me about a university archive. I don't think that would work with me because there's so much about individuals. I mean, immediately they start talking about lawyers and getting people to sign off. And so I never do anything like that. Never.
Yeah. As long as you can keep your website and make sure that it's never going to accidentally get deleted.
There's copies of it.
You're the person to do
that.
Yeah,
it's backed up a lot.
And then you can, as you get older, you can, have apprentices or something that are doing similar things that you would trust to carry on.
Anybody can do anything they want. And also, somebody in Zen Center, someone rather official, asked about, well, what am I going to do with my archives? I said, well, basically I put it all online. I mean, there's a lot of stuff I haven't done yet, but I say you can download it. I ask people, you can download whole websites. Download Cuke.com and ShunyuSuzuki.com. Anyway, very good. Everybody download it all. Because I don't think it won't belong to anybody, really.
Yeah, we don't for web stuff. You don't need a university.
Yeah.
You just put it online and make lots of copies.
Yeah. I have handed out thousands of floppy disks, CDs, data DVDs, thumb drives and hard drives with everything are selected portions of the archive for years and years. I haven't done that recently, but I think the last time I did it was 5 years ago in Germany.
Yeah, people like you say, you can copy a whole website. So what?
We do that. There's some web. I wish I'd done more of it because they disappear. And I've taken off a lot of like interviews, like with Mel or somebody like that, because I know it's going to disappear. And there's some I haven't. But we took off the whole Sweeping Zen, which was an enormous archive. And then the guy became a fundamentalist Christian and lost interest in it. And I realized he'd been working for the devil. But anyway, that's on, we got it off of, he said where it went. It went to like archive.com or one of those things. Uh-huh. And Terabest, I don't know if you know about Terabest, but there is a massive Buddhist archive in Hungary, in English and Hungarian, the guy's name is Terabest. He has the whole archive on his family antique furniture business website, and it's massive. And he studied with Soto Zen in Japan, so and then he'll put whole books on it. He put stuff of mine on it. I put my books online where they can be read too. But anyway, all right, that's enough of all that. This has been a great pleasure. And
really, from my end also, and I just want to thank you again for arranging
Yeah,
this.
yeah,
It's been fun. I've never done anything exactly in this
yeah.
format.
I had to push you a little,
Yeah.
you know, but I'm glad you did it.
Well, I'm glad I got
Oh
pushed.
yeah, you knew what to say, man. That was good. So take care and keep up the good work.
Okay. You
All
too,
right.
David. Yeah.
Bye-bye. So thank you most kindly, Ken Knabb. Wow. No. Yeah, that was quite a journey. And keep up the good work. And we'll be seeing you in the future. This has been a Cuke Audio podcast. I'm DC Poobah of Cuke Audio and Cuke Archives, coming to you from sleepy Sonora with Doggett, Bandita, Feline Cuchita, and dear lovely Katrinka. And we're wishing you and yours and all of us a grand awakening.